Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform one last time before stepping into the recruitment office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she filled out paperwork that would change her life forever. At 19, she was tired of watching her younger siblings go hungry, while her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep their small apartment. The military promised stability, education benefits, and a chance to serve something greater than herself. The recruiter, Sergeant Thompson, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure about this, sweetheart? The Army isn't a place for delicate flowers." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I'm sure, Sergeant." 6 months later, she stood in formation at Fort Benning, Georgia, sweat dripping down her face under the scorching sun. Basic training had been everything the recruiter warned her about and more. The physical demands pushed her body to its limits, but Sarah discovered reserves of strength she never knew existed. More importantly, she found her calling in the medical corps. Her drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Martinez, had noticed her natural aptitude for emergency care during a training exercise when another recruit suffered a severe allergic reaction. While others panicked, Sarah calmly administered first aid and potentially saved the young man's life. That moment earned her respect and a recommendation for advanced medical training. After basic training, Sarah was assigned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st First Airborne Division. The base buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared for various deployments worldwide. Sarah threw herself into her work at the base hospital, learning everything she could about combat medicine, trauma care, and field surgery. Her supervisor, Major Patricia Williams, became something of a mentor. Major Williams had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from seeing combat. She recognized Sarah's potential immediately. "Mitchell, you have good instincts," Major Williams told her after Sarah successfully stabilized a soldier who came in with multiple fractures from a training accident. "But instincts aren't enough. You need to study, train, and push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of." Sarah took those words to heart. She spent her off-duty hours studying medical texts, practicing procedures, and volunteering for additional training opportunities. When the chance came to attend the Army Special Operations Combat Medic course, she was ready. The course was brutal. Only 40% of candidates completed the program, and Sarah was one of only 3 women in her class. The physical requirements were demanding enough, but the medical training was what truly separated the qualified from the hopeful. Students had to master advanced trauma care, perform surgery in field conditions, and learn to work under extreme stress. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah found herself treating multiple casualties in a simulated firefight. Blank rounds cracked overhead while instructors shouted conflicting orders and created chaos designed to test their ability to focus under pressure. Sarah moved methodically from patient to patient, prioritizing care and making life-or-death decisions in seconds. Her performance caught the attention of Colonel James Harrison, a decorated Special Operations officer who was observing the exercise. Colonel Harrison had commanded Special Forces units in Iraq and Afghanistan and had a reputation for being an excellent judge of character and capability. After the exercise, he pulled Sarah aside. "That was impressive work out there, Specialist Mitchell. Have you given any thought to joining a Special Operations unit?" Sarah felt her heart race. Special Operations was the elite level of military service, and being invited to even consider it was an honor. "Yes, sir. It would be a privilege to serve at that level." "It's not just about privilege," Colonel Harrison said seriously. "It's about responsibility. Special Operations medics save lives in the most dangerous situations imaginable. You'll be dropped into hostile territory with small teams who depend on you completely. There's no backup, no hospital around the corner. When someone gets hurt, you're all they have." The weight of his words settled on Sarah's shoulders, but instead of feeling intimidated, she felt energized. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been preparing for. Over the next 6 months, Sarah completed specialized training in combat medicine, survival skills, and weapons proficiency. She learned to parachute, rappel from helicopters, and navigate in hostile territory. More importantly, she developed the mental toughness required for special operations. Her first deployment came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated that American hostages were being held in a remote compound in Syria. The mission required a small team to infiltrate the area, conduct surveillance, and be ready to provide medical support during a potential rescue operation. Sarah packed her medical kit with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Every item had been carefully selected and positioned for maximum efficiency. In combat, seconds mattered, and fumbling for equipment could mean the difference between life and death. The team consisted of 6 soldiers, including Sarah. They were led by Captain Rodriguez, a veteran of multiple deployments, who had earned his team's complete trust through his tactical expertise and genuine care for his soldiers. The other team members were Sergeant Wilson, a communications specialist, Corporal Davis, a sniper, Private First Class Johnson, a demolitions expert, and Sergeant First Class Thompson, the team's second medic and Sarah's direct supervisor in the field. During the pre-mission briefing, Captain Rodriguez emphasized the importance of their role. "This isn't just about gathering intelligence," he said, pointing to satellite images of the compound. "If this turns into a rescue operation, civilians' lives will be in our hands. They may be injured, traumatized, or both. We need to be ready for anything." Sarah studied the mission parameters carefully. The compound was located in a mountainous region with limited access routes. Enemy forces in the area were well armed and familiar with the terrain. If things went wrong, extraction would be difficult and dangerous. The team flew into the operational area under cover of darkness, parachuting into a remote valley 15 kilometers from the target. They moved carefully through the rugged terrain, using night vision equipment and following predetermined routes to avoid enemy patrols. For 3 days, they maintained surveillance of the compound from concealed positions. Sarah divided her time between monitoring radio communications and ensuring her medical equipment remained ready for immediate use. The waiting was almost harder than action would have been. On the 3rd night, intelligence confirmed that a rescue operation would proceed, and Special Forces assault teams would hit the compound at dawn while Sarah's team provided overwatch and medical support from their position on a nearby ridgeline. As the sun began to rise, Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her aid bag contained everything needed to treat gunshot wounds, burns, fractures, and shock. She had practiced the procedures so many times that her hands could find any item in complete darkness. The assault began with precision strikes that neutralized enemy sentries. Sarah watched through binoculars as assault teams moved into the compound, clearing buildings systematically. Everything appeared to be going according to plan until she heard Captain Rodriguez's voice crackle over the radio. "Overwatch, we have casualties at the compound. 1 civilian with severe trauma, 2 assault team members wounded. We need immediate medical support." Sarah felt her training take over as adrenaline surged through her system. Moving to casualty site, she reported, already gathering her equipment. The run to the compound took 12 minutes across difficult terrain. Sarah arrived to find chaos. The rescued hostages were traumatized and confused. Assault team members were securing the area, and 3 people lay on stretchers awaiting medical attention. Sarah quickly assessed the casualties. The civilian, a journalist who had been held captive for 6 months, had multiple infected wounds and showed signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration. The 2 soldiers had been wounded by shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that detonated during the assault. Working with practiced efficiency, Sarah prioritized care based on the severity of injuries. She started an IV on the civilian to address dehydration and administered antibiotics for the infected wounds. The soldier with the more serious shrapnel wounds required immediate surgery to stop internal bleeding. Under a makeshift shelter, with gunfire still echoing in the distance, Sarah performed field surgery that saved the soldier's life. Her hands remained steady as she located and repaired damaged blood vessels, her training overriding the natural fear that combat brings. 4 hours later, all 3 casualties had been stabilized and evacuated to a field hospital. The mission was declared a success, with all hostages rescued and no fatalities among friendly forces. Sarah's medical interventions had been crucial to that success. Back at base, Colonel Harrison personally commended Sarah for her performance. "What you did out there was exceptional, Specialist Mitchell. You saved lives under the most difficult conditions imaginable." But Sarah barely heard the praise. She was already thinking about the next mission, the next opportunity to use her skills where they were needed most. She had found her calling in the chaos of combat medicine, and she was determined to excel at it. Over the following months, Sarah deployed on increasingly complex missions. She treated wounded soldiers in urban firefights, provided medical support during humanitarian operations, and even performed surgery in the back of a moving helicopter during an emergency evacuation. Each mission added to her experience and reputation within the special operations community. Fellow soldiers began requesting her specifically for high-risk operations, knowing that her medical skills and calm demeanor under pressure could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah's personnel file grew thick with commendations and performance evaluations that consistently rated her as exceptional. She was promoted ahead of schedule and given additional responsibilities that reflected her growing expertise and leadership potential. More importantly, she had earned something that couldn't be measured in ribbons or rank: the complete trust of her fellow soldiers. In the tight-knit special operations community, that trust was more valuable than any official recognition. As her first deployment neared its end, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed since walking into that recruitment office. The uncertain teenager worried about her family's financial struggles had become a confident combat medic trusted with the lives of America's elite warriors. But she also knew that her greatest challenges lay ahead. The skills she had developed and the reputation she had earned would soon be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The path she had chosen was dangerous, but it was also deeply meaningful. Every life saved, every mission completed successfully, every moment when her training made the difference between success and failure reinforced her conviction that this was where she belonged. The military had given her more than just a career. It had given her purpose, identity, and the chance to serve something greater than herself. As she prepared to return home for a brief leave before her next assignment, Sarah Mitchell was no longer the uncertain young woman who had enlisted to help her family. She was a combat medic whose skills and dedication had already saved lives, and would save many more in the challenges ahead. Sarah returned from leave to find new orders waiting for her. She had been selected for assignment to a joint special operations task force operating in Afghanistan. The mission briefing revealed the scope of what lay ahead. Her unit would be working in the most dangerous regions of the country, providing medical support for complex operations against high-value targets. The task force was based at Bagram Airfield, a sprawling military complex that served as the hub for special operations throughout Afghanistan. Sarah arrived on a transport plane filled with soldiers, contractors, and supplies, the familiar smell of jet fuel and dust greeting her as she stepped onto the tarmac. Her new commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Michael Santos, a soft-spoken man whose calm demeanor masked extensive combat experience. During their first meeting, he outlined the unique challenges they would face. "This isn't like conventional military operations," he explained, spreading maps across his desk. "We work in small teams, often behind enemy lines, with limited support and communication. The enemy knows this terrain better than we do, and they don't follow traditional rules of engagement. Our success depends on each team member performing at their absolute best." Sarah was assigned to Alpha Team, led by Captain David Chen, a Green Beret with 4 previous deployments. The team included Master Sergeant Lisa Parker, a communications expert, and the team's senior non-commissioned officer, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a weapons specialist, Sergeant First Class Amanda Thompson, an intelligence analyst, and Corporal Kevin Wu, a demolitions expert. From the moment Sarah met her teammates, she sensed something different about this assignment. The bond between team members was deeper than anything she had experienced before. These soldiers had served together through multiple deployments, and their trust in each other was absolute. Master Sergeant Parker, in particular, became both a mentor and a friend. Parker had been one of the first women to serve in special operations, and she had faced challenges that Sarah was only beginning to understand. "The job doesn't care what gender you are," Parker told her during their first conversation. "Bullets don't discriminate, and neither does trauma. But some people will always see gender before they see capability. You'll have to prove yourself over and over again, even after you've already proven yourself." Sarah understood the truth in those words, but she was confident in her abilities. Her training had been thorough, her performance had been exceptional, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The team's first mission together was a reconnaissance operation in the Kunar province, an area known for significant Taliban activity. Intelligence reports suggested that a high-value target was operating from a compound in the region, and Alpha Team was tasked with gathering information to support a potential capture operation. They inserted via helicopter under cover of darkness, landing on a remote mountainside several kilometers from the target area. The terrain was rough and unforgiving, with steep valleys and rocky outcroppings that provided both concealment and obstacles. Sarah carried her standard medical kit plus additional supplies for an extended operation. The weight was considerable, but her conditioning prepared her for the physical demands. More importantly, she was mentally ready for the isolation and stress of working behind enemy lines. The team moved carefully through the mountains, using night vision equipment and following routes designed to avoid known enemy positions. They established their observation post on a ridge that provided clear sight lines to the target compound while remaining concealed from enemy view. For 5 days, they maintained constant surveillance, documenting movement patterns, identifying personnel, and mapping the compound's defenses. Sarah rotated through watch schedules with her teammates while staying ready to provide medical support if needed. On the 4th night, their position was compromised. A Taliban patrol, larger than usual and better equipped than expected, discovered their observation post and launched a coordinated attack. The firefight was intense and close range, with enemy forces attempting to overrun their position while Alpha Team fought to maintain their defensive perimeter. During the engagement, Corporal Wu was struck by enemy fire. The bullet entered his shoulder and caused significant bleeding that required immediate attention. Under fire, Sarah moved to his position and began providing medical care while bullets cracked overhead and ricocheted off the rocks around them. Working by the light of a red-filtered flashlight, Sarah quickly assessed Wu's wound. The bullet had missed major arteries but had caused muscle damage and bleeding that needed to be controlled. She applied pressure dressings, administered pain medication, and started an IV to replace lost fluids. Captain Chen called for immediate extraction, but the nearest helicopter was 20 minutes away and would have difficulty landing in the rocky terrain while under enemy fire. Alpha Team would need to hold their position and keep Wu stable until help arrived. Sarah continued treating Wu while her teammates fought off successive enemy attacks. She monitored his vital signs, adjusted his position to prevent shock, and prepared him for evacuation. Despite the chaos around them, she maintained the focused calm that had become her trademark. When the extraction helicopter finally arrived, Sarah coordinated Wu's transfer while providing covering fire with her sidearm. The entire evacuation took less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours under the intense enemy fire. Wu survived his injuries and made a full recovery, returning to duty 6 weeks later. Sarah's quick action and expert medical care had saved his life and preserved the team's combat effectiveness. More importantly, she had earned the complete trust and respect of her teammates. The successful completion of that mission, despite the complications, established Sarah as an integral part of Alpha Team. Her medical skills had been proven under the most extreme conditions, and her courage under fire had demonstrated her worthiness as a special operations soldier. Over the following months, Alpha Team conducted dozens of operations throughout Afghanistan. They participated in direct action raids against Taliban commanders, provided medical support for village outreach programs, and conducted reconnaissance missions in areas where conventional forces couldn't operate safely. Each mission reinforced Sarah's reputation as an exceptional combat medic. She treated everything from minor injuries sustained during training to life-threatening trauma from IED explosions. Her medical kit became legendary among special operations units, perfectly organized and always ready for any situation. But it was her performance during a hostage rescue mission that truly set her apart. Intelligence had located a group of aid workers being held by Taliban fighters in a remote village. The rescue required precise coordination between multiple special operations teams, with Sarah's team providing medical support for both rescued hostages and any wounded team members. The compound where the hostages were held was heavily defended and located in terrain that made conventional assault difficult. The plan called for Alpha Team to establish a medical aid station in a secured building, while assault teams cleared the compound room by room. When the operation began, everything seemed to go according to plan. The assault teams moved efficiently through the compound, neutralizing resistance and locating the hostages. But as they prepared to evacuate, an IED exploded near the compound entrance, causing multiple casualties among both assault team members and the rescued hostages. Sarah found herself treating 6 wounded people simultaneously. 2 assault team members had severe shrapnel wounds. 3 hostages were suffering from various injuries sustained during their captivity, and one hostage had been wounded in the IED explosion. Working with surgical precision, Sarah prioritized care based on the severity of injuries and likelihood of survival. She performed life-saving procedures on the most critical cases while directing other team members and providing basic first aid to those with less serious injuries. The most challenging case was a young aid worker who had suffered significant internal injuries in the explosion. Sarah made the difficult decision to perform emergency surgery in the field, using the compound's kitchen table as an operating surface and battery-powered equipment from her medical kit. The surgery lasted 40 minutes, with gunfire still echoing outside as security teams held the perimeter. Sarah removed shrapnel from the patient's abdomen, repaired damaged organs, and stabilized her condition enough to survive evacuation to a field hospital. All 6 casualties survived, and the aid worker Sarah operated on made a complete recovery. The mission was hailed as a complete success, with all hostages rescued and no friendly fatalities despite the complications from the IED attack. Sarah's performance during the rescue operation earned her a Bronze Star Medal with Valor, one of the highest decorations for combat heroism. But more meaningful to her was the letter she received from the aid worker whose life she had saved, thanking her for the skill and courage that had given her a second chance at life. As her deployment continued, Sarah's reputation extended beyond her immediate team. Special operations commanders throughout the theater began requesting her specifically for high-risk missions, where medical support would be critical. She became known as someone who could be counted on to perform under the most extreme conditions. Her teammates and Alpha Team had become like family to her. They had shared experiences that created bonds deeper than anything she had known before. Master Sergeant Parker continued to mentor her, helping her navigate the unique challenges of being a woman in special operations. Captain Chen recognized her leadership potential and began giving her additional responsibilities. She trained new medics joining the unit, developed improved medical protocols for special operations, and even led missions when medical expertise was the primary requirement. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had found her identity as a soldier. The uncertain young woman who had enlisted to help her family had become a confident professional whose skills and dedication saved lives regularly. She had proven herself in the most demanding environment possible and had earned her place among America's elite warriors. The physical and mental demands of the deployment were enormous. Sarah had lost weight despite maintaining her fitness, and the stress of constant high-stakes operations was evident in the faces of all team members, but she had never felt more fulfilled or more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. As Alpha Team prepared for what would be their most challenging mission yet, Sarah reflected on how much she had grown since arriving in Afghanistan. Every operation had taught her something new about medicine, leadership, and herself. The young medic who had arrived at Bagram was becoming a seasoned special operations professional, but she also knew that her greatest test lay ahead. Intelligence reports were indicating a mission that would push every team member to their limits and beyond. The skills she had developed and the reputation she had earned would soon face their ultimate challenge in ways she could not yet imagine. Whatever came next, Sarah Mitchell was ready to face it with the same dedication and courage that had brought her this far. The briefing room fell silent as Lieutenant Colonel Santos spread classified photographs across the conference table. The images showed a fortified compound deep in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, surrounded by rocky terrain that made conventional assault nearly impossible. "This is our target," Santos began, his voice carrying the weight of the mission's importance. "Intelligence confirms that Omar Hassan, a high-value Taliban commander, is operating from this location. He's responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed dozens of coalition forces over the past 6 months." Sarah studied the photographs carefully, automatically analyzing potential medical scenarios. The compound's remote location meant that casualty evacuation would be extremely difficult. If anyone was wounded during the operation, she would need to keep them stable for an extended period before medical evacuation could arrive. Captain Chen leaned forward, examining the terrain features. "What's our insertion method, sir?" "Helicopter drop 15 kilometers out," Santos replied. "You'll move overland to establish surveillance, then coordinate with Bravo Team for a simultaneous assault. The operation window is narrow. We have 48 hours when weather conditions will allow helicopter support." Master Sergeant Parker raised her hand. "Enemy strength? Estimated 15 to 20 fighters, but they know the terrain advantage is theirs. They've had months to prepare defensive positions, and they're well armed with heavy weapons and explosives. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission tension building in her stomach. This operation carried higher risks than anything Alpha Team had attempted before. The isolation, enemy strength, and difficult terrain created multiple scenarios where her medical skills would be critically needed. The mission briefing continued for 2 hours, covering every detail from insertion routes to extraction procedures. Sarah paid particular attention to the medical support plan, noting the locations of potential landing zones for medical helicopters and the estimated response times for various emergency scenarios. After the briefing, Alpha Team gathered in their team room to prepare equipment and discuss tactics. Sarah laid out her medical supplies methodically, checking each item against her pre-mission checklist. She packed extra blood products, advanced trauma supplies, and portable surgical equipment that might be needed for complex injuries. "Heavy load this time," Corporal Wu observed, watching Sarah organize her medical kit. "Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it," she replied, a motto that had guided her through every mission. Master Sergeant Parker joined them, carrying her own equipment. "Intel suggests this Hassan character has been planning something big. That's why the timeline is so tight. We need to get him before he can execute whatever he's planning." The team spent the evening reviewing mission details, studying maps, and conducting equipment checks. Sarah used the time to review medical procedures she might need to perform under combat conditions. She had performed emergency surgery in the field before, but this mission's isolation meant she would need to be prepared for more complex scenarios. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about her family back home. She had called her mother before the mission briefing, keeping the conversation light while carefully avoiding any details about her work. Her youngest sister was starting college now, helped by the education benefits Sarah's military service had provided. The next morning, Alpha Team gathered on the helicopter pad before dawn. The aircraft that would carry them was a modified Blackhawk equipped with additional fuel tanks for the long flight to their insertion point. Sarah checked her medical equipment one final time, ensuring everything was secure for the flight. The helicopter lifted off as the sun rose over the mountains, beginning a flight that would take them deep into hostile territory. Sarah watched the landscape change below them as they flew further from friendly forces and closer to their target. 2 hours later, they touched down on a rocky plateau 15 kilometers from the target compound. The helicopter immediately lifted off, leaving Alpha Team alone in the vast wilderness of the Afghan mountains. The silence after the helicopter's departure was profound, broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks. Captain Chen checked his GPS and pointed toward a distant ridge. "Objective is that direction. We'll move in bounds, using the terrain for concealment. Stay alert, this area is known for enemy patrols." The team moved carefully through the rugged landscape, taking advantage of rocky outcroppings and ravines to avoid detection. Sarah adjusted her pack straps frequently, the weight of her medical equipment adding to the physical demands of the movement. By late afternoon, they had reached their surveillance position on a ridge overlooking the target compound. Through high-powered optics, they could clearly see the fortified buildings and defensive positions that intelligence had described. Enemy fighters moved through the compound with the confidence of people who felt secure in their stronghold. Sarah established her aid station in a concealed position behind the ridge, organizing medical supplies for quick access while maintaining concealment from enemy observation. She had learned from experience that preparation during quiet moments often determines success during emergencies. For 12 hours, Alpha Team maintained surveillance while Bravo Team moved into position on the opposite side of the compound. The coordination required precise timing and careful communication to ensure both teams were ready for the simultaneous assault. As dawn approached on the second day, Captain Chen received confirmation that Bravo Team was in position. The assault would begin in 30 minutes, timed to coincide with the period when enemy sentries were typically least alert. Sarah performed final checks on her equipment while monitoring radio communications between the assault teams. Her role would be to provide medical support from the overwatch position while being ready to move to the compound if needed. The assault began with suppressed gunfire, as both teams engaged enemy sentries simultaneously. Sarah watched through binoculars as Alpha Team members moved efficiently through the compound's outer defenses while Bravo Team secured the main buildings. Initially, everything proceeded according to plan. Enemy resistance was lighter than expected, and both teams advanced toward their objectives without encountering significant opposition. Sarah began to think this might be one of the rare missions that went exactly as planned. Then everything changed in an instant. The explosion was massive, far larger than anything they had anticipated. A secondary blast followed immediately, then a third. Through her binoculars, Sarah watched in horror as sections of the compound collapsed in clouds of dust and debris. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the radio, strained with urgency. "Overwatch, we have multiple casualties. The target was booby-trapped. We need immediate medical support." Sarah was already moving before he finished speaking, grabbing her medical kit and additional supplies. The run to the compound took 8 minutes across difficult terrain, and she could hear explosions and gunfire continuing as she approached. She arrived to find chaos. The compound had been rigged with explosive charges that detonated when the assault teams breached the main building. 3 soldiers from Bravo team were down with serious injuries, and 2 Alpha team members had been caught in secondary explosions. The most critically injured was Staff Sergeant Martinez from Bravo team, who had suffered massive trauma from the initial explosion. He was unconscious and bleeding severely from multiple shrapnel wounds. Sarah quickly assessed his condition and realized he needed immediate surgery to survive. Working under a makeshift shelter created by stretching ponchos between concrete walls, Sarah began the most challenging medical procedure of her career. She had to control bleeding from several sources while monitoring Martinez's vital signs and coordinating care for the other casualties. Sergeant Thompson from her own team had sustained significant burns and needed immediate fluid replacement and pain management. Corporal Williams from Bravo team had a compound fracture that required stabilization and pain control. 2 other soldiers had various shrapnel wounds that needed cleaning and bandaging. Sarah moved between casualties with practiced efficiency, prioritizing care based on the severity of injuries and likelihood of survival. She started multiple IVs, administered pain medication, and performed emergency procedures while coordinating with her teammates who were providing basic first aid under her direction. The surgery on Martinez lasted over an hour, with enemy sniper fire occasionally forcing the team to take cover while Sarah continued working. She removed shrapnel from his chest cavity, repaired damaged organs, and stabilized his condition enough for evacuation. Throughout the ordeal, Sarah maintained the calm focus that had become her trademark. Her hands remained steady while performing delicate procedures, and her voice remained level while giving instructions to her teammates. The lives of 5 soldiers depended entirely on her skill and composure. When the medical evacuation helicopters finally arrived, all 5 casualties were stable and ready for transport. Sarah had worked for 6 hours straight, performing procedures that would challenge surgeons in fully equipped hospitals. Her quick thinking and expert medical care had saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. The mission had successfully eliminated the target. Hassan had been killed in the initial assault, but the cost had been higher than anyone anticipated. Without Sarah's immediate and expert medical intervention, multiple soldiers would not have survived to see their families again. Back at base, Lieutenant Colonel Santos personally thanked Sarah for her performance during the operation. 5 soldiers are alive today because of your skill and courage. But Sarah barely heard the praise. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, from the intensity of the mission. More importantly, she was already thinking about how to improve medical protocols for future operations to prevent similar casualties. The mission had tested every aspect of her training and experience. Under the most extreme conditions imaginable, she had performed at the highest level of her profession. The young medic who had started her military career was now a proven combat medical professional whose skills had been tested under fire and found exceptional. As Alpha Team prepared for their next mission, Sarah reflected on what she had accomplished and what still lay ahead. Each mission brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to use her skills where they mattered most. She had found her calling in the chaos of combat medicine, and she was determined to continue serving at the highest level possible. The Mountain Compound mission had proven that she could handle whatever challenges her profession might bring, but it had also shown her that the most demanding situations often brought out the best in soldiers who were properly trained and committed to their duty. Sarah Mitchell had become exactly the kind of soldier she had hoped to be when she first walked into that recruitment office years ago. 3 weeks after the Mountain Compound mission, Sarah received orders that would change the trajectory of her military career. She was being transferred to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. to receive specialized training and eventually serve as a senior medical instructor for Special Operations Forces. The assignment was both an honor and a responsibility. Only the most experienced and skilled medics were selected to train the next generation of Special Operations medical personnel. At 24, Sarah would be one of the youngest instructors in the program's history. Her final weeks in Afghanistan were spent transitioning her responsibilities to her replacement and completing after-action reports on the missions she had participated in. The detailed medical reports she wrote would be used to improve training protocols and medical procedures for future operations. Master Sergeant Parker organized a farewell gathering for Sarah's last night at Bagram. The assembled soldiers represented units from across the Special Operations community, testament to the reputation Sarah had built during her deployment. "I've served with a lot of medics over the years," Parker addressed the group, "but I've never seen anyone with Sarah's combination of technical skill and courage under fire. She's saved more lives than most people will ever touch, and she's done it with the kind of professionalism that makes the rest of us better soldiers." The praise from someone Sarah respected so deeply was both humbling and affirming. She had pushed herself to excel not for recognition, but because the lives of her fellow soldiers depended on her competence. Knowing that her efforts had made a difference validated every difficult moment of her deployment. Captain Chen presented her with a unit coin, a tradition in Special Operations that recognized exceptional service. "This team has been stronger because you were part of it," he said simply. "That's the highest compliment any soldier can receive." The flight back to the United States gave Sarah time to reflect on how much she had changed during her deployment. The experiences in Afghanistan had tested her in ways that no training could have prepared her for, and she had emerged as a confident professional with skills that few people possessed. Fort Bragg was dramatically different from the forward operating bases she had grown accustomed to in Afghanistan. The training facilities were state-of-the-art, and the medical equipment available for instruction was more advanced than anything she had used in combat. Her new position was as a senior instructor in the Special Operations Medical Training course, teaching advanced trauma care to medics preparing for their first deployments. The irony was not lost on her. She was now responsible for preparing other soldiers for the same challenges she had just completed. The head of the training program was Colonel Patricia Reynolds, a veteran Special Operations medic whose career had spanned multiple conflicts and whose reputation for excellence was legendary throughout the medical community. "Your record speaks for itself," Colonel Reynolds told Sarah during their first meeting. "But teaching requires different skills than performing. You'll need to learn how to transfer not just the technical knowledge, but the mindset and confidence that made you successful in combat." Sarah threw herself into her new role with the same intensity she had brought to her deployment. She studied instructional techniques, developed training scenarios based on her real-world experience, and worked to create learning environments that would prepare students for the realities they would face. Her first class consisted of 12 medics, all preparing for deployment to various Special Operations units. Sarah recognized the mixture of confidence and nervousness in their faces, the same emotions she had felt before her first deployment. "The most important thing you can learn," she told them during their first class, "is that your technical skills are only part of what makes you effective. You also need to develop the mental discipline to function under extreme stress and the physical conditioning to perform when you're exhausted, cold, scared, and under fire." Sarah's teaching style was practical and demanding. She created realistic training scenarios that forced students to apply their medical knowledge under pressure while dealing with simulated enemy fire, equipment failures, and multiple casualties. One particularly challenging scenario involved treating casualties in a collapsed building while wearing full chemical protective equipment and working by flashlight. Sarah watched her students struggle with the physical demands while trying to maintain their medical focus. "In combat, nothing ever goes according to plan," she explained after the exercise. "Equipment fails, weather changes, and the enemy adapts. Your job is to be so thoroughly prepared that you can handle whatever unexpected challenges arise." Her reputation as an instructor grew quickly. Students appreciated her practical approach and the fact that every technique she taught had been tested under actual combat conditions. Other instructors began consulting with her on curriculum development and training methods. After 6 months at Fort Bragg, Sarah received news that would test her in an entirely different way. She had been selected for promotion to Staff Sergeant and would be decorated with the Silver Star, one of the military's highest awards for gallantry in combat. The Silver Star recommendation was based on her actions during the Mountain Compound mission, specifically her performance in treating multiple casualties under heavy enemy fire while coordinating medical care for soldiers from 2 different units. The award ceremony was scheduled to take place at the Pentagon, with senior military leadership and media representatives attending. Sarah felt honored but also somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. She had performed her duties to the best of her ability, but she had never sought recognition or publicity. Colonel Reynolds helped prepare her for the ceremony and the media attention that would accompany it. "This recognition isn't just about you," she explained. "You're representing all the women who serve in special operations and all the medics who risk their lives to save others. How you handle this attention will impact how the public views our profession." The ceremony itself was formal and impressive, held in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, with an audience that included military leaders, politicians, and journalists. Sarah stood at attention as the citation was read, describing her actions in clinical terms that somehow failed to capture the intensity and chaos of that day in Afghanistan. When the medal was pinned to her uniform, Sarah thought about her teammates who had fought alongside her and the soldiers whose lives had been saved by her actions. The recognition belonged to all of them, not just to her. The media attention following the ceremony was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Interviews with military publications, feature articles about women in special operations, and requests for speaking engagements created demands on her time that interfered with her teaching responsibilities. More challenging was the attention from social media and online forums, where her military service became a topic of debate among people who had never served in the military. Some praised her achievements, while others questioned whether women belonged in special operations roles. Sarah tried to ignore the online commentary and focus on her work, but the constant scrutiny was draining. She had signed up to serve her country and save lives, not to become a public figure or symbol for broader debates about military policy. The situation became more complicated when she was invited to speak at a national conference on women in the military. The organizers wanted her to discuss the challenges facing women in combat roles and advocate for expanded opportunities for female soldiers. Sarah felt conflicted about the invitation. She believed strongly that competence and character should determine military assignments, not gender. But she also recognized that her visibility could help other women who were facing discrimination or limited opportunities. After consulting with Colonel Reynolds and other mentors, Sarah decided to accept the speaking engagement. Her speech focused on the importance of maintaining high standards while ensuring that all qualified personnel had opportunities to serve in roles that matched their abilities. "I didn't succeed in special operations because I'm a woman," she told the audience. "I succeeded because I was properly trained, physically prepared, and mentally committed to excellence. Those should be the only criteria that matter for any soldier in any role." The speech was well received, but it also generated additional media attention and debate. Sarah found herself being quoted in articles about military policy and invited to participate in discussions about topics far beyond her area of expertise. Meanwhile, her work as an instructor continued to demand her primary attention. A new class of medics was preparing for deployment, and Sarah was determined to give them the best possible preparation for the challenges they would face. One of her students, Sergeant Jennifer Hayes, reminded Sarah of herself at the beginning of her special operations career. Hayes was technically proficient and physically capable, but she lacked confidence in high-stress situations. Sarah worked with Hayes individually, creating additional training scenarios and providing mentorship that went beyond the standard curriculum. She shared lessons from her own experience and helped Hayes develop the mental toughness needed for special operations. "The technical skills are the easy part," Sarah explained during one of their sessions. "The real challenge is learning to trust your training when everything around you is chaos and confusion. That confidence comes from practice and experience, but it also comes from understanding that you belong here and that your skills matter." Watching Hayes progress from uncertainty to confidence reminded Sarah why she had chosen to become an instructor. The opportunity to prepare other soldiers for success in combat was as meaningful as her own service had been. But the attention and scrutiny that came with her public recognition continued to be a challenge. Sarah had to balance her responsibilities as an instructor with requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and ceremonial appearances that took time away from her primary mission. The situation reached a turning point when she was assigned to participate in a high-profile military demonstration for visiting foreign dignitaries. The event was designed to showcase American special operations capabilities, and Sarah's presence was specifically requested because of her medal and recent media coverage. As she prepared for the demonstration, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since receiving the Silver Star. The recognition had opened doors and created opportunities, but it had also brought complications she had never anticipated. More importantly, she realized that her individual story was part of a larger narrative about the evolution of military service and the expanding roles of women in combat. Whether she had sought it or not, her visibility carried responsibilities that extended beyond her personal career. The demonstration would prove to be another turning point, presenting challenges that would test not only her professional skills, but also her ability to handle the complex pressures of being a public figure in uniform. Everything she had learned about leadership, composure, and professional excellence would be needed for what lay ahead. The demonstration was scheduled for a crisp October morning at Fort Bragg's main parade ground. Representatives from 12 allied nations had gathered to observe advanced special operations training techniques, and Sarah had been specifically requested to participate in the medical training portion of the demonstration. Sarah arrived early to prepare her equipment and coordinate with the other instructors who would be participating. The medical demonstration would show how special operations medics treated combat casualties under realistic conditions, using scenarios based on actual combat experiences. The visitors included high-ranking military officers, defense officials, and several prominent politicians who served on military oversight committees. Media representatives from military publications and mainstream outlets were also present to document the event. Colonel Reynolds briefed the participating instructors on the importance of the demonstration. "This is an opportunity to show our allies the capabilities of American Special Operations Forces," she explained. "Your professionalism and competence reflect on our entire military." Sarah understood the significance of the event, but she approached it the same way she approached any training exercise. Her focus was on demonstrating proper medical techniques and ensuring that the scenarios provided realistic learning opportunities. The demonstration began with a simulated combat scenario involving multiple casualties with various types of injuries. Sarah worked methodically through triage procedures, prioritizing care based on the severity of injuries, and demonstrating advanced trauma treatment techniques. Her performance was flawless, displaying the same calm competence under pressure that had characterized her combat service. She explained her procedures clearly while working, helping observers understand the decision-making process that guided her actions. The foreign observers were clearly impressed by the sophistication of the training and the skill level demonstrated by the American instructors. Several asked detailed questions about medical protocols and training methods, which Sarah answered with the same professional demeanor she brought to her regular teaching duties. Following the formal demonstration, attendees moved to a reception where they could interact more informally with the participating soldiers. Sarah found herself surrounded by visitors eager to learn more about special operations medicine and her personal experiences in Afghanistan. Most of the conversations were professional and respectful, focusing on technical aspects of combat medicine and the challenges of providing medical care in hostile environments. Sarah was comfortable discussing these topics and appreciated the genuine interest in her field of expertise. However, one interaction proved to be dramatically different. General Marcus Webb, a visiting official from the Department of Defense, approached Sarah with what initially seemed like routine questions about her service record and the training programs at Fort Bragg. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," he began, his tone friendly but with an undertone that immediately put Sarah on alert. "I've been reading about your impressive service record. Quite remarkable achievements for someone so young." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied professionally, maintaining the respectful demeanor appropriate for addressing a senior official. General Webb continued, "I'm curious about the selection process for special operations medics. The physical and mental demands must be quite challenging, particularly for some soldiers." Sarah sensed where the conversation was heading, but answered directly. "The standards are demanding, sir, but they're necessary given the mission requirements. All soldiers who meet those standards can succeed in special operations roles." "Indeed," Webb nodded, but his expression suggested he had predetermined opinions about the topic, "though I imagine some accommodation must be made for different physical capabilities. The implication in his words was clear, and Sarah felt her professional composure being tested. "The standards are the same for all soldiers, sir. Mission success depends on competence, not on assumptions about capabilities." What happened next would become seared into Sarah's memory forever. General Webb reached toward her uniform jacket, saying, "Let me just see what unit patches you're wearing." Before Sarah could react, Webb grabbed the front of her jacket and roughly pulled it open, ostensibly to examine her unit insignia. The action was so unexpected and inappropriate that Sarah was momentarily stunned. Several other people nearby witnessed the incident, including Colonel Reynolds and 2 foreign military observers. As Webb examined her jacket, his eyes fixed on the Special Operations Combat Medic patch on her uniform. His expression changed dramatically, shifting from condescending curiosity to something approaching shock. The patch represented the most elite level of military medical training, awarded only to medics who had completed the most demanding courses and demonstrated exceptional performance in combat operations. It was a symbol that commanded immediate respect from anyone who understood its significance. Webb's hands seemed to freeze as he stared at the patch. The conversation around them had stopped as others noticed what was happening. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Webb appeared to realize the magnitude of his mistake. Colonel Reynolds stepped forward immediately. "General Webb, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Sarah maintained her military bearing despite the shock and humiliation of the incident. Her training had prepared her for many challenging situations, but not for this kind of treatment from a senior military official at a formal event. The foreign observers were clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. The inappropriate nature of Webb's actions was evident to everyone present, regardless of their military experience or cultural background. Webb finally released Sarah's jacket and stepped back, but the damage was done. His actions had demonstrated a level of disrespect and unprofessionalism that was shocking in any context, but particularly egregious given the formal nature of the event and Sarah's distinguished service record. I apologize," Webb stammered, clearly realizing that his behavior had been completely inappropriate. "I didn't realize."
But Sarah was no longer listening to his fumbling attempts at an apology.
The man who had just humiliated her in front of international observers had been prepared to dismiss her capabilities based on gender assumptions, only to freeze when confronted with evidence of her actual qualifications. Colonel Reynolds quickly moved to defuse the situation, guiding Sarah away from Webb and toward a quieter area of the reception. But the incident had been witnessed by too many people to be quietly contained. "Are you all right?" Reynolds asked when they were out of earshot of the other guests. Sarah nodded, though she was struggling to process what had just happened. In all her years of military service, including combat deployments in hostile territory, she had never experienced anything as shocking as being physically examined, like a specimen, by a senior official. The immediate aftermath of the incident was handled with military efficiency. General Webb was quietly removed from the event, and the remaining demonstrations continued as scheduled. But word of what had happened spread quickly through the military community. Within hours, Sarah found herself at the center of a controversy that would extend far beyond Fort Bragg. Videos of the incident captured by security cameras and cell phones began circulating on social media. Military news outlets picked up the story, and it quickly became a national conversation about respect, professionalism, and gender dynamics in the military. Sarah's first instinct was to minimize the incident and continue with her duties. She had faced much more dangerous situations in combat, and had always focused on mission accomplishment rather than personal grievances. But the scale of the response made it clear that this was bigger than her individual experience. Colonel Reynolds explained the broader implications during a private meeting the next day. "This incident has highlighted issues that extend far beyond what happened to you personally," she said. "How the military responds will send a message about our values and commitment to treating all soldiers with respect." Sarah found herself reluctant to become a focal point for larger debates about military culture and gender equality. She had always preferred to let her performance speak for itself, rather than engage in advocacy or political discussions. But she also recognized that her silence might be interpreted as acceptance of inappropriate behavior. Other female soldiers were watching to see how the institution would respond to clear misconduct by a senior official. The investigation that followed was thorough and public. General Webb's actions were reviewed by military legal authorities and the findings confirmed that his behavior had been completely inappropriate and contrary to military standards. More importantly for Sarah, the investigation also examined her service record and qualifications, ultimately providing official validation of her exceptional performance and contributions to Special Operations medicine. The Special Operations Combat Medic patch that had frozen General Webb became a symbol of excellence that could not be dismissed or minimized. Every mission, every life saved, every moment of courage under fire was documented in her official record. The final resolution came when Webb was formally reprimanded and removed from his position. The military's response sent a clear message that inappropriate behavior toward any soldier, regardless of rank or gender, would not be tolerated. For Sarah, the incident proved to be a turning point in ways she hadn't expected. The humiliation and shock of that moment had forced her to confront the reality that her achievements, no matter how exceptional, would not automatically shield her from prejudice and disrespect. But the incident also demonstrated the power of documented excellence. The combat medic patch that had stopped Webb in his tracks represented not just her individual achievements, but the achievements of all the soldiers whose lives she had saved, and all the students she had trained. As Sarah returned to her teaching duties, she carried with her a deeper understanding of the broader significance of her military service. She was not just a medic or an instructor, but a representative of what was possible when soldiers were judged by their competence rather than their demographics. The incident with General Webb would be remembered as a moment when the military reaffirmed its commitment to professionalism and respect. But for Sarah Mitchell, it was also the moment when she fully understood that her individual excellence was part of a larger story about the evolution of military service and the continuing fight for equality and respect. Her combat medic patch remained on her uniform, not just as recognition of her own achievements, but as a symbol of the standards and values that defined the military at its best. And that symbol continued to command the respect it had always deserved.